You could reasonably argue that Jesus Christ is the most famous human being to have ever lived, which makes it extra weird that we know so little about his life. If you happen to live in a place where Christmas is a widespread celebration, the occasion of Jesus' birth feels like it's set in stone. After all, why would we make such a big deal out of December 25th if we didn't know that's when Jesus was born? Well, as it turns out, things aren't quite that simple. For one, the earliest Christians didn't actually bother celebrating Jesus' birth. It wasn't until AD 336, 300 years after Jesus' death, that the church finally got around to officially honoring the occasion.
What is his name?
Jesus.
As for December 25th, it could be that the date was picked to compete with pagan celebrations of the winter solstice, or it could be tied to the Feast of the Annunciation, March 25th. That's the day that celebrates when an angel appeared to Mary and told her that she was with child. Add 9 months to that, and we get December 25th. Heck, we're not even sure what year Jesus was born in. The Gospel account of King Herod hunting for the infant Jesus suggests Jesus was born at some point before Herod's death in about 4 BC. Though, given a number of shaky details, some scholars wonder if the king may have died earlier than that. Either way, many modern scholars now argue that Jesus was born in the summer or fall, as the angels were said to have appeared to shepherds in the fields. If it really was December, those shepherds would have been huddled inside with their flocks. Temperatures at night in the region would have been in the 40s at least. If you throw in the Star of Bethlehem as a celestial occurrence, one could make the case that it could be any number of planet or star alignments in July, September, or yes, even December, depending on the year. The true birth date of Jesus Christ will likely remain a mystery. But surely, you ask, we must know where Jesus was born. Well, no. While the Gospels of Matthew and Luke point to Bethlehem as Jesus' birthplace, the Gospel of Mark doesn't mention it at all. Neither does the Gospel of John have anything to say on the location. That's not definitive evidence that Jesus wasn't born in Bethlehem, of course, but it does seem like an odd detail to omit, especially given that it is generally accepted today that Mark was the earliest written of the Gospels, perhaps as early as 50 AD. The Gospel makes a big fuss over the notion that Jesus was a descendant of King David, and David was certainly associated with Bethlehem. But Mark also links him to Nazareth, and John to the region of Galilee. It's also worth noting that earlier Jewish texts have claimed that a Messiah would come out of Bethlehem. It could be that later Gospel writers linked Jesus in Bethlehem to strengthen the case that he really was the Messiah, while earlier writers felt no need to do so. Either way, the question of Jesus' birth is sure to spark a heated debate at pretty much any theological conference. The Gospels spend quite a lot of time on the story of Jesus' birth before following up with a little bit of information about his early years. But after Luke 2:41-52 tells the story of a 12-year-old Jesus visiting a temple, the trail goes cold. We don't pick the narrative up again until Jesus is an adult poised at the very beginning of his ministry, which Luke says begins when he would have been about 30 years old. That leaves us with a tremendous 18-year gap in the tale. So what exactly was Jesus doing during that time? We simply do not know. Or maybe we do. Okay, so the real answer kind of depends on who you want to listen to. If you're going only by the canonical books of the Bible accepted by most Christian churches, you're going to be left in the lurch. If you're willing to turn to apocryphal texts, however, you'll get a little more detail, especially with the Gospel of Thomas, which purports to contain details about Jesus' preteen years. Go even further afield and you'll encounter legends with all sorts of proposals for what Jesus was doing in those lost years. Historically speaking, he was most likely trucking along as a handyman or a general contractor for most of that time. But more colorful accounts claim that he traveled as far as India, Japan, or even Britain to gain his mystical knowledge. You know what Jesus looks like. You don't have to be a Christian to know the beard and long hair equals Jesus. But how accurate are those portraits? One of the biggest mysteries of Jesus is that we don't really know what he would have looked like, meaning all of those images of the man himself are based largely on speculation. We can make a pretty informed guess about Jesus' physical looks based on the common appearance of Judean men at the time, given that no one mentions Jesus looking out of the ordinary. Researchers using male skeletal remains from 1st century Galilee as their basis have created a model of Jesus that has medium brown skin, relatively short curly hair, and a muscular build that would have been appropriate for a handyman laborer, give or take a 40-day fast to skinny him up. Still, these depictions can only guess at his true image, as we have no detailed first-hand descriptions or physical remains to point us to the real Jesus. It's certainly clear that time has crafted a depiction of Jesus heavily influenced by our own cultures and individual perceptions.
Oh, I see. You thought I'd be white.
Kind of, yeah.
Look, I don't know what to tell you.
The image of a long-haired, bearded Jesus, for instance, is more of a Byzantine invention meant to make him look philosophical and authoritative according to the ideals of the time. By contrast, the earliest known Christian artwork of Jesus shows him clean-shaven with short hair. The standard line in many churches is that Jesus was most definitely single, and nothing in the Bible definitively says that Jesus was married. But neither does it clearly state that he was never married. This subject sparked major debates in the early church, as some of the first official Christians argued over whether it was better to remain celibate or get married. Some used Jesus' seemingly singleness as support for celibacy, but as early as the 2nd century, there were theologians suggesting that Jesus may have been a married man. Apocryphal texts have only made this topic even more confusing. The Gospel of Jesus' Wife, a 7th to 8th century fragment of papyrus written in Egyptian Coptic, contains a line from Jesus in which he refers to a wife. Some academics have taken this as a clear reference to a real human wife, but others claim it's just a metaphor for the church. Moreover, as Oxford historian Dermot McCulloch told The Guardian, this work was likely written to support one side in an early debate on the role of women in the church. It does widen its focus to include another disciple and Jesus' mother, suggesting it was speaking more to the wider question of female involvement in Christianity than whether or not there was a Mrs. Jesus. One of the early miracles of Jesus' ministry involved him walking on the waters of the Sea of Galilee. In Matthew 14:22-33, Jesus sends his disciples ahead of him to the other side of the sea while he remains there and prays. A storm approaches, and so Jesus decides to join them, walking out to their boats on the surface of the water. The astonished men then proclaim him to be the true Son of God.
Oh my God, it's Jesus! He's walking on water!
But how did Jesus actually do it? For many, the straightforward answer is that it's supposed to be a miracle. For others, a bit more explanation is needed, and therein lies the mystery. One theory is proposed by oceanographer Doron Knopf. In a 2006 issue of the Journal of Paleolimnology, Knopf theorizes that the freshwaters of the Sea of Galilee could have partially frozen over, as the climate then was much cooler. It wouldn't have been enough to stop a fishing boat from going out, but could have provided a thin, precarious surface for Jesus to walk upon. It could also be that our reading comprehension simply isn't up to snuff. Some scholars have suggested that the line, "upon the sea," in the original Greek text should be translated to mean that Jesus was walking on the shore, or possibly through the shallows. Perhaps confused by low light and adverse weather, the disciples merely thought he was strolling on the water. Unless we can travel back to the time and place of the incident, however, we're probably not going to get an answer for this one. According to the narrative of the crucifixion, Jesus died on a Friday and was resurrected on a Sunday. So what was happening that Saturday? With all of the miraculous and mystical elements involved in the story, many can't help but wonder if something else was going on during the time that the Bible fails to clarify. That's not to say the Bible is entirely mum on the matter, though. Luke 23:43 has Jesus promising one of his fellow crucifixion victims that they'll be together in paradise that day, implying Jesus hung out in heaven before returning to earth. 1 Peter 3:18-20 implies that a post-crucifixion Jesus went and preached unto the spirits in prison, while 1 Peter 4:6 says that the gospel was preached to the dead. The Apostles' Creed, a statement of faith that may have appeared as early as the 2nd century, claims directly that Jesus descended into hell after his burial. This belief has led to the concept of the harrowing of hell, in which Jesus was thought to have taken that day to descend into the underworld to preach to the souls of good people who hadn't heard of him. It was also an opportunity for medieval artists to depict Jesus beating up demons, so who's going to complain about that? However cool the idea of Jesus taking a boomstick to Beelzebub's face might be, though, it's still not directly attested to in the canonical Bible. Shame. For modern Christians, the notion that Jesus was the Messiah is so widely understood and accepted that to question it is nigh on heresy. That was also the case for the followers of Jesus, who seem to have quickly proclaimed him to be the Redeemer that had been predicted by earlier Jewish thinkers. The mystery here lies with Jesus himself. Did he think that he was the Messiah? Controversial religious scholar Bart Ehrman argues that it's likely Jesus really did think that he was all that, noting that the Gospel of John has Jesus calling himself the Son of God and directly referring to himself as the Messiah. He also supposedly made comments implying that he had existed for a long time. His time on Earth, he suggested, was merely a brief stopover from heaven. However, Ehrman admits that this all could be an invention of the Gospel writer, and it's not clear if the real Jesus ever said these things. What's more, Ehrman has pointed out that these statements only appear in the Gospel of John. The other Gospels, all of which were written earlier, don't have anything direct to say about Jesus' self-belief. And if he was making such an immense claim as to propose he was the Messiah, why would Matthew, Mark, and Luke have never mentioned it? It's not super clear-cut, but based on the Gospels alone, there are contradictions as to what Jesus thought of himself and when he believed it.